Pandemic Legacy is basically a campaign-driven version of Pandemic. The campaign is going to take players on a wild ride over the course of 1 year, and each month, or each play rather, the players will take on the roles of a team of experts fighting disease outbreaks across the world. The major differences with Pandemic Legacy over a traditional game of Pandemic is that the game evolves as you play. Your actions in one game might carry over to the next, meaning your decisions can have significant repercussions over the course of the entire campaign. So before we get started on the review, I'll give you a quick overview of how the game Pandemic in general is played in case you haven't played it before. Then I'll discuss what Pandemic Legacy adds. I'll also throw out there that there's not going to be any major spoilers in this review. What I disclose will be pretty well what you'll find out just by opening the box and reading the rulebook and seeing some of the components. So with no further delay, let's take a look at Pandemic Legacy.
Pandemic is played on a map of the world, and the cubes on the board represent the 4 diseases that the players are going to need to address. The more cubes in a city, the more likely it is that that city is going to have an outbreak, which more or less means the disease is going to spread significantly. Now, to cure the diseases, players, who are represented by the coloured pawns, will be collecting cards with the city's names that are on the board. If a player collects 5 same coloured cards, they can go to a research centre, which is represented by the little white houses, and develop a cure for that disease. If you cure all 4 diseases, you win. So on a player's turn, what can they do to help prevent these diseases taking over? Well, on a player's turn they have 4 actions. For one action, they can move to an adjacent city, treat a disease by removing a cube in their current location. They can share knowledge, which means they can trade cards with another player in the same location that they're in. This is obviously a crucial step in developing a hand of 5 of the same coloured cards to develop a cure. And of course, players can do other things like organise flights across the board via a few methods, one of which is by discarding a city card from your hand and moving your pawn to that location. Each player also has a character card, and these characters can have special abilities that can come into play. Now, on each player's turn, they'll take actions attempting to clean up diseases across the world, and then they'll draw 2 city cards, and there is a hand limit of 7. The next step is they will infect cities, which means they draw city cards from a separate deck of cards other than the ones they draw to form their hand. And after drawing these cards, they place disease cubes on those cities' locations. So the diseases are always slowly spreading across the globe, and players will usually follow suit to clean up after them. But here's the kicker. During a player's turn in the draw city cards step, so when they're adding cards to their hand, an epidemic card may present itself, which basically means several cities are going to get infected. Also, if at any time a city is supposed to get a 4th cube, an outbreak occurs, which means the adjacent cities to the city that had the outbreak all get cubes, which can of course cause another outbreak, and another one, and there can be a huge snowball effect causing massive problems for the players, as each time an outbreak occurs, the outbreak marker goes up. If it gets to the end, the players lose. Also, if a disease cube's pool is completely depleted, they lose as well. Even if that hasn't beaten them, if a pool is nearly depleted, you've got to also realise that there's going to be a massive clean-up operation in order, as the board will be swarming with disease. Epidemics and outbreaks are going to be something you come to loathe in this game. So how does Pandemic Legacy change things? Well, there is a Legacy deck. This deck of cards is basically an event or story deck. The deck itself will tell you when to draw cards from it. You'll read them aloud and make changes to the game accordingly. Without spoiling anything, these cards are very story-driven, very thematic. They can make permanent changes to gameplay that can make the preceding game for players more strategic, as they're going to have to be more focused on a certain issue within a sitting of the game. Furthermore, other changes mean that if a player is in a location that an outbreak occurs, they get a scar. This is usually a modifier to the player's abilities. And if you get too many scars, well, the character dies. The cities, when they get outbreaks, will also have their panic level increased by placing a sticker on their location. If a city keeps getting outbreaks, it can become harder to move into the city due to riots, the city collapsing, or it falling. And remember, because these stickers stay in place each play of the campaign, some areas on the board, like the red area on my board, has copped a real beating. Also, players after winning a game will get to choose things that may assist them. These benefits can also change the traditional rules to the game, and there's a section in the rulebook where you'll place stickers that introduce these new rules. There are also the top secret files that contain hidden information and elements concerning gameplay, as well as 8 boxes containing what mostly appears to be new game components that may be introduced. What's inside each of these boxes? At this point, your guess is as good as mine. With Pandemic Legacy, basically what you have is a game set up in a way that due to changes after each play, tension just grows and grows. You'll be introducing new rules, new components, and entering each game not really knowing what to expect or what's to come. The tension therefore I feel is much closer to what a good deduction game can create, because there's a great deal of mystery and excitement surrounding each play. Pandemic Legacy is also more strategic than traditional Pandemic. For example, if you continue to use the same characters, then there's a good chance that they'll die. And the threats you face through these unknown elements mean you'll be discussing your character selection in much more detail, as some combinations of characters may be better equipped to tackle these new threats that come about throughout the game. Also, starting locations. If you build a research station, then there's actually a chance that it will stay there in future games, meaning you can elect to start there. So there's much more strategy involved, and of course, narrative. The Legacy deck has players pretty much playing through a movie script, and it's a great deal of fun. Now, replayability is the main issue here that's probably going to be discussed. Once you've played it through, that'll be about all it has to offer. So with Pandemic Legacy, you'll play between 12 to 24 games. I'd say averaging closer to 20 though, because I don't think many people will be knocking it over in 12 games. And basically after that, it's done. And for the price, for many people, it's going to seem like below average value. But consider this, the game has shot up the Board Game Geek charts like nothing else, despite extended replayability being an obvious flaw. And yet, it's being overlooked by so many gamers. That's how good their experiences have been. So if that's your issue, fight through. It's worth it.
The bottom line is that if you're a Pandemic fan, this game is a must-have. If you didn't like Pandemic because it wasn't strategic enough or it lacked theme or narrative, you found it just wasn't really for you in that regard, Pandemic Legacy is exploding with themes, so give it a whirl and I'm sure you'll be impressed. I certainly was. And while I was never a huge fanboy of Pandemic, I liked it, but I wasn't a fanboy, I'm certainly a fanboy of Pandemic Legacy. It's an excellent game. Anyway guys, thanks for watching and I'll see you all again soon, or when another game comes along that is as good as Pandemic Legacy.